Our second question for you is, how does mindfulness connect to wisdom?
First of all, we have to step back. I've been doing mindfulness for over 3 decades, meditation and contemplation. Been teaching it for 2 decades. I've been studying it scientifically. I think I was the first person at the University of Toronto to study it scientifically, do academic work on it. It's a big topic for me. So I am a lover of mindfulness. However, I'm quite a strong critic of the current way in which the West, whatever that means, has been adopting mindfulness. So I want to talk about mindfulness, I forget the author, he wrote a book criticizing Western, he calls it McMindfulness, which is, right, so if you take a look, for example, and because there's mindfulness in many traditions, so the two I know the most about in practice are Taoist and Buddhist. And they're ecologies of practices. There are many different things you do, and they all have strengths and weaknesses, and they play off against each other. So there's meditative practices, contemplative practices, there's ethical practices, there's reflective practices, and you put all of these together. Right? What happens, right, is out of that whole ecology, one thing, meditation, has been excised and then transported into North America and then commodified. And its main goal is to make people sort of content with being drones within the corporate machinery. That's not what mindfulness should be. Mindfulness should be a whole set of practices that are designed to fundamentally transform you. So I think a way of understanding what mindfulness is and how you can even see the difference between meditation and contemplation is, remember earlier I was talking about how you have to sort of frame the world with your attention and you have to ignore so much, and that's adaptive. Well, pretend that my glasses, I'll use them as an analogy for my mental framing. So this is my framing of the world, right? And I'm seeing through them and by means of them. But sometimes what I need to do is, instead of looking through them, I need to step back and look at them to see if the lenses are distorting my vision at all. That's what you're doing in meditation. You're stepping back and looking at the mental lens, the mental framing, and seeing, oh, that might be actually distorting how I'm seeing the world. But using the analogy, how can I tell, suppose I clean my glasses. How can I tell if I've actually made them better? Do I keep looking at them? What do I have to do? I have to put them back on, right? And I have to see if I can now see more clearly, more deeply. That's contemplative practice. So this is like Vipassana, and then this is like contemplating the 3 marks of existence. Now, when you put these two in, each corrects the other. If I never took off my glasses, I'm probably distorting and I don't know. If I just do this, I don't know if I've made it better or worse. I have to cycle between these, and then I start to see more clearly and deeply. And so it's less and less likely that my mental framing is misleading me and causing me to misrepresent the world. And that's a significant way of improving wisdom. When you get those moments of insight, those are like I did a few minutes ago, that's like a little taste of wisdom. That's like when you realize, oh, I've been framing this all wrong. Now imagine if that became because you practice mindfulness, that became much more comprehensive in many domains of your life, so that in many situations, often situations that might be messy and complex, you can see through to what is really important, what really matters, and fit yourself to that situation because of this kind of practice. That's how mindfulness can contribute to wisdom.
Another question we wanted to ask was, how do systemic barriers impact people's ability to seek wisdom?
That's a question. Oh, that's a really important question. So the thing is, it's not a question that I have done a lot of research on. There's a bit of almost like a catch-22. Systemic barriers prevent people from getting the access to the ability to clarify their vision, which actually blinds them to the systemic barriers. So it's like a vicious cycle. The systemic barriers prevent people from gaining access to the training and the transformation, so that they are actually blind to the systemic barriers, and it keeps people locked in that fashion. And so part of part of what's needed is a way to break out of that. And that means when you get when you get people are in those patterns of reciprocal narrowing, these vicious cycles, you've got to have, there's this, think about it in therapy. Somebody comes in, they often know they know in one sense what's wrong, right? You'll say, why are you here? And they'll say, well, I'm really, really stubborn. And it's causing it's causing my relationships to just go bad. And you want to say to them, well, why just stop being stubborn? But then what you do is you actually do this. You talk to them for a while, you go around, and they're often talking, you say, tell me something you really like about yourself. And they'll say, I'm really persistent. I don't give up. I keep going no matter what. And they don't realize that those are two different ways of describing the exact same thing, stubborn and persistent, right? And so what the therapist has to do is has to get inside that sort of way things are, like doing that vicious cycling, and sort of break it up within. And that's a really interesting and difficult thing to do. Plato talked about this and Socrates. Socrates wouldn't, in fact, he wouldn't tell people. He would ask them questions. He would get them to reflect. And I think we need to do that, get that sort of Socratic thing going, so people, right, they don't realize initially that the systemic barriers are being exposed and challenged, but it's broken up enough that they get some access to the training that then starts to empower. So you have to sort of, it's like in Tai Chi, you have to fit yourself to this machinery. And as it's sort of being a reciprocal narrowing vicious circle, you can make it do exactly the opposite and reciprocally opening. And that's how you can sort of get around this machinery's ability to just clamp down when you're trying to bring about the change. At least that's what I would propose.
But like I didn't see how wisdom had anything to do with, like, I thought it only pertained to people who were like upper middle class people who didn't have anything that they had to do, instead of like focusing on mindfulness. Like, it's kind of like the question, how do you do like mindfulness if you have to worry about having to pay your rent, or if you're going to be able to eat that day?
Sure, sure.
If you have to, like, you have priorities for yourself and others, mindfulness isn't the first thing on your mind. So I was confused about how that could even happen, even for you to connect to wisdom from mindfulness, when you have other priorities and more literal things to do.
Well, first of all, I mean, I'm not saying, I'm not putting one in place of the other. I'm not saying, well, I don't care about those issues you mentioned, practice mindfulness. I think that's ridiculous. I think that's a preposterous thing. But what I was proposing to you is that it doesn't seem initially like these practices might be helping you in those practical problems, but that's where I would push back on you. And say, an ability to see how your problems are being misframed by you and how other people are manipulating you through that misframing. That's not separate from the issues you brought up to me. Like, advertising, for example, works by getting you to disconnect what grabs your attention. Do you have a cell phone?
Yeah.
Okay. You need more wisdom, because it's making salient things to you that don't actually make a difference to improving your ability to solve the very problems you're talking to me about. Instead, what it's doing is trying to transform you into somebody who's more receptive to buying certain products and to adopting certain ideas that are not being generated by you or your community. Wisdom isn't optional. It's right in your hand. You need it. That's how I would answer you.
Okay. So thinking back to like when you said, like, do we like need wisdom to like get rid of the like poverty and wealth disparity? Like, why would we use wisdom for that? Like, to see through other people's eyes what they're going through, or is
Yeah,
just like
yeah.
general?
So, for example, It's not just wisdom for you, it's also, you need to get wisdom to the people that are putting up these barriers. So this has been done. As people go higher up in the corporate hierarchy, their ability to take the perspective of other people goes down. So they get less and less able to understand that there are perspectives other than their own, which means they literally get incapable of understanding what you're trying to say to them.
Yeah, I understand that. Yeah.
So I didn't mean just wisdom for you either. I meant wisdom for them as well.
Mm-hmm.
So how do we get high schoolers to, I guess, become interested in this? Because when I think about what you're saying, I just think about high schoolers just being like, well, whatever, just kind of shrugging their shoulders. And this is important because we're the next generation coming up, and we're going to be impacted by artificial intelligence.
Yes, that's right.
How do we make this so that young people see the urgency in this?
So the academy, the literal academy that Plato isn't his name, by the way. It's his nickname. It means broad shoulders, because he was a wrestler. The gymnasium and the martial arts, right? And Socrates was a soldier, right? You don't appeal to people just at the level, that's what I said, of their beliefs. You start giving them skills, you start giving them perspectives, you start giving them enhanced mind-body coordination, you start giving them enhanced dialogical practices. Don't tell them at all that this has anything to do with wisdom. Mm-hmm. Just make these things attractive to them, and they will be attractive to them, because I see it over and over again. And then as they start to ask questions, because you've empowered them, you've given them the space and the energy to open up, when they start asking the questions, that's when you introduce the topic of wisdom. But you might start with, here's a better way in which conversations can be had. Let's practice that and see if you like it. That's where you start, things like that. Or here's a better way of understanding how, so the powers that be are teaching you to understand your body in a particular way. It's basically a commodity that you should shape to be in their service. But your body is actually you in a really profound way. How can you go from just thinking that thought, which is largely useless, to actually going through a transformative process of re-inhabiting your body? Don't tell them that that's wisdom, but tell them, do you want to re-inhabit your body in a better way so you feel more alive and healthy in your body? Oh yeah, of course. That's what you do.